Hey, welcome back everybody to the DMLA conference. I'm Doug DeWeer, the technical advisor to DMLA. This is the follow-up to the Hot Topics and Tech panel that was done on Monday. Joining us today will be Rob Sewell from SmartFrame, Mark Milstein from Microdata Solutions, and then Matthew Such from Getty Images. Nancy Wolf, who was the attorney on the first call, won't be able to make the session today, but we'll do our best without her. What I thought I would do is just wait a few minutes, let people trickle into the meeting and talk about what it is that we talked about on Monday. I'm going to share my screen here. Anyway, so what we have are the 6 initiatives that the tech committee at DMLA are currently working on, and run through them one at a time. The Google licensable image features, which is a recent thing that Google launched 2 months ago. Very popular with a lot of companies and also a hot topic of discussion. We also have image-centric SEO best practices, which ties in pretty much with the previous initiative, where people are now very concerned about what it takes to get their images ranked highly in Google Image Index. Metadata retention, which also has a role to play in the Google licensable image feature, in the sense that if you take the time and trouble to embed the metadata into the image, it would be nice if publishers didn't strip that data out as a part of their workflow, because then the badge would be visible on the publisher site, which would be great for content creators. Then we have image and video tracking, which is always an important thing for copyright enforcement, and Mark will be able to answer questions about that. Something referred to as the universal RF license definition, which is what Nancy spoke about. I'll try to do what I can in that area. Obviously, what we're trying to do is make it easier for content publishers to attach a license to a piece of material and have people understand what those restrictions are without having to hire an attorney to interpret the license. And then streaming stills image file format, which is a really exciting initiative, which is what Rob will be able to speak towards. But it really is about introducing a new way of images being used on the web, and we'll get into that later. So the way this will work is that, unlike some of the previous roundtables, we encourage people to be able to ask and engage with our panelists. So if you have a question and you want to be unmuted, just click on the participants tab at the bottom of your Zoom window, and then go over and click on raise hand. When we see a raised hand, we'll unmute your microphone and you can talk to the panel. Or if you don't want to do that, you're more than welcome to type in your questions into the chat, and we'll take it from there. I'm gonna go ahead and stop my share, and right away find out if anybody has a question. Please raise your hand. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is turn it over to Matt and ask him to follow up on some of the things that he talked about during Monday's session.
Okay, I don't see any questions coming in immediately, so you guys will definitely stop me and interrupt me when and if that happens. We'll, of course, got to give some people some time to find the chat button, type down what they want, think about what they're talking about and asking us. So hi everybody. Again, my name is Matthew Such. I'm the Vice President of Search Engine Optimization at Getty Images and iStock Photo. I had the honor of being in part of the conversation yesterday with the Google team, the Google Images team, that introduced the licensable badge to their Google image search system, and they went over a bunch of technical items. I'm happy to answer any questions about that, as well as some of the topic that we covered earlier in the week, which was about imagery, SEO imagery, best practices there. This is one of the reasons why, of course, SEO imagery is important. Google owns a huge market share of search, just search engine marketing. 69% of it is their web search, 20% of it is their Google image search, just their image search. And of the 69% of web search, Google still has about 40% of that has an image pack. Images show up in those search results. So I wanted to review some of the basics and advanced items. This is some of our checklist materials. I'm happy to go over some of these questions in detail if you have any ideas about them. Making sure that we place images in image tags. It's very important from Google. They said that in their talk yesterday. The file name and the alternate text, the captions, and the way that you present the material. One of the most interesting things that I discovered as an SEO, we're constantly learning about our world and the way that things work. Something I discovered this week. I started to challenge our teams on the lazy loading concepts. How do we lazy load? How does one actually lazy load on your website? And I found out, as a former developer, which I've not been into developing in the last year or two, I didn't stay up with the latest standards. The newest standard on lazy loading is now that you can add in the loading equals lazy attribute into the HTML tag of an image. And as a former programmer, I have to tell you, that is super easy. I mean, I can't speak for all content management systems, but that is one of the easiest implementations because Google grades your page speed off of its Chrome browser. The Chrome browser system is what it's processing your web page off of and understanding your web page. Chrome browser understands that attribute and many generations of Chrome browser, so you don't have to worry about backward compatibility. Other systems are starting to use the loading equals lazy attribute as well. So the fallback to it is very simple. Nothing breaks. If there's a browser that doesn't understand that attribute, it just keeps working like you never used it before. But if you implement those couple of characters, you now have an automatic browser lazy loading. And because Google grades you off of their Chrome system, which understands that, it will improve your page loading. Now, of course, you want to keep an eye on your customer engagement. Is the browser doing it in a way that you think should be positive for your website and the visitors that are coming there, and they're having a positive experience still? Technically, the browser will automatically handle that when it thinks someone is about to get to the point where that image should be, it will load it right below where the page fold is. So it's been a very valuable learning experience for me this week. I'm recommending, of course, our teams look into doing this even further. It doesn't require JavaScript. It doesn't require active scripting or anything, or React or Angular, those fancy words. I really want to recommend it to everybody. If you have a website out there that has a lot of images on it, unless you're one of my competitors, you should go do that.
That's practically worth the price of admission for me to have you share that tidbit with me. I've already written it down because that's pretty slick. It is a hard target. SEO is just short of black magic, in my opinion, because you never know what affects what, and it's always changing in the way they rank and signal certain things. And it's a lot of trial and error, but it just helps to kind of think rationally about how, if you were a developer trying to do a crawler, like what would you do to make it as optimal as possible? And as long as you keep that in mind, you'll probably do pretty well. I know that when I was playing around with the test that I showed for panoramic images, I was kind of blown away about the fact that aspect ratio made a difference. I mean, the aspect ratio of the image was clearly affecting how it ranked SEO wise, because I basically put up 100 images of a square dog and then a rectangular dog and then a panoramic dog. And sure enough, they were all put up at the same time in the same way, but the panoramics were driven to the bottom of the search result. And that was just something, if you'd asked me, I would have lost that bar bet in a second. Like, how, they don't pay attention to that. It's like, oh, they do. Another thing that they pay attention to, apparently, and they say this publicly, is picture size. We're all concerned about theft. And so we throw up these tiny little thumbnails as the preview and say, okay, we're safe, we're going to get ranked. And what you may not realize is the smaller the image is that you present to the crawler, that signaling is going to force it further down in the search result. And to that end, in the case, again, of the panoramic images test case, we actually decided to throw out there to be, I think it was like, 1,500 pixels on the short edge for their previews. And it had the desired result. And we can get away with that because we're using smart frame technology to present a 10,000 pixel preview to the user, but we're not really worried about theft too much because of the anti-theft deterrent capabilities of the smart frame file format. And to talk about that, I'm going to ask Rob a little bit more about, how do you guys go about what's going on behind the scenes that allows for smart frame images to be crawled by Google?
Sure. So as you rightly say, the process of streaming an image to the browser, which affords all the theft prevention. One of those theft preventions is actually we eliminate the JPEG from the HTML source code. So we're actually technically invisible to web bots and crawlers. In many instances, if it's a malicious web bot and crawler, of course, we don't want our content to be scraped at scale. But of course, we do want the upside of Google indexing us. So in that instance, we work very closely with the Google search team to ensure that we index a thumbnail, but a thumbnail that's a good enough size that it won't be negatively impacted by SEO. And that will carry all the licensable badge buttons and details you need with a copyright warning message and a call to action such as click here to view the photo. And that then links back to the full high-res version of the smart frame on the hosted platform.
That also allows you to adulterate. I mean, instead of having just the naked image that you inject dynamically for the crawler to see, you can also embellish that image with all sorts of either icons or messaging or watermarks or whatever. It's kind of, you have a very robust sort of dashboard that allows for your smart frame customers to go in and say, I want these things to appear over my image, both as a thumbnail to the crawler and also on the website proper, because maybe under no circumstances do you want your images to be out there without a watermark on them. You know, all of that is basically something you just dial up in SmartFrame when you decide to do that.
Absolutely. So we're actually going through a process of standardization. So certainly there's a huge amount of customization you'll be aware of, Doug, but you know, our ultimate vision is to become an image standard. We want to redefine the image standard. We see a world in 5-10 years time where all images are streamed to the browser for all the reasons discussed on the previous call, piracy and lack of value leakage, both in the music and film industries, through downloadable file content. They adopted streaming content, and now they're both prospering in terms of either a subscription to access the content on demand or a free subscription, but interrupted by ads and generating ad revenue. So we are looking to achieve the same thing, but in order to become a standard, we really need to standardize our product. So we did offer a huge amount of flexibility and also ways to publish that indexed image to Google. But we realize now, as we're working so closely with Google Images and understand what the optimal message and overlay and thumbnail size is, we want to lock that down because over our thousands of users all over the world, if they're all putting different overlays, different size thumbnails, it's not going to be a unified experience. So we're looking to become more of a standardized solution for Google Images search in the future, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I will remind people that, I mean, I've been around long enough to have seen the birth of a file format and then the eventual process of it becoming a standard. I mean, I hate to say TIFF, but I was there, you know, and JPEG and PDFs, and you know, these things have all started off usually as a commercial proprietary format, and then they get honed and honed and honed and adopted and standardized, and then become something, you know, what we have today. But they've got to start somewhere, you know. And in this case, SmartFrame is the first of its kind that's been popularized, and I am very much in support of it because I love it. You know, the anti-deterrent aspects to it are obviously very important. But as I also mentioned, I think on Monday in the test case where I was using it, the ability to do a deep zoom, you know, which can be done using other file formats, but the fact it just comes along for the ride when you switch to a streaming format like SmartFrame, you know, that was actually the biggest benefit to the customer site. He really was getting off. His customers were just excited about the fact that they could zoom in tight because they sell wall coverings, and the detail factor was absolutely critical to that purchase process. One thing I want to do real quick, of course, this is flying the seat of my pants here, but I do want to share my screen to show something that it seemed to just get glossed over at the last time. So I'm going to go ahead and share it. And if you guys can confirm you're looking at my Safari window.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
We talked about how the badge appears over images that are determined licensable by the Google crawler. But one thing I don't think was necessarily highlighted was you notice that the websites that are showing these are not stock agencies. They are the publishers. They are the people who are using an image that has the badge data attached to it. And when you click on these, NBC News, for example, I click on it and it is still going to link to the NBC's news site, but down here it's going to say this was supplied by Getty. And what needs to be really clearly understood by everyone is that the reach, your marketing reach, isn't limited to what you do SEO-wise on your own site. It's the SEO that's being done by the publisher sites that are using your images. So you're going to get more coverage, so to speak, if you were able to convince the publishers using your content to, one, keep your metadata intact in the image, and then secondly is, you know, obviously you can't influence them to get their SEO game going, but the better their SEO is, the better their images, therefore the more exposure for you. So if you think about it, it's likely that an image is going to get more exposure through the publishers using it as opposed to the content provider selling it, because the content provider represents a single point source for that image, whereas of course that image can be licensed 100 times on 100 different sites, and therefore that image could potentially show up many, many more times on all the publisher sites as opposed to just your site. And Mark probably can talk a little bit more about, you know, what can be done. Or Mark, in your experience, have you ever had anyone contact a publisher saying, you know, why did you strip my data? Or what is there out there that we can do to encourage publishers not to strip the metadata that comes in the images?
Right. I think many of us who've had the opportunity to listen to Matthew from Imatag speak perhaps were wowed or stunned into silence 2 years ago when at the IPTC photo metadata conference in Berlin, which coincided with CPIC's annual meeting, he presented a slideshow which has now become almost iconic, where he mentions the fact that a full 80+% of most metadata is stripped from its asset upon publishing. And when I sit on the video metadata committee for IPTC, and that topic has come up many times in co-conference discussions with the photo metadata side and with the present director of IPTC. And the answer to that is that it is a major problem. Everybody's aware of it. Everybody would love to have an instant solution. Technically, there is a solution. You could, in all theory, put a lock on the metadata. However, IPTC has taken the stance that it is best that they prefer not to do that. They didn't want to be in the position of mandating a lock on something because they didn't know in the future if there should ever be a scenario where that metadata needs to be removed for safety reasons for the content creative's life. For example, if that content was created in a particularly dangerous environment and that metadata needed to be removed in order to prevent the identification of that person who made the photography, that metadata could include, of course, the GPS coordinates of where the picture was made, the date, any other what I call passively carried technical data. We're not speaking about the descriptive metadata that comes along with it. And so that's where we're at this very moment. I think that you know, there's a lot of opportunities that are going to come down the road very shortly with IPTC's development with video metadata. While still metadata pretty much is going to be, or pretty much has remained. What's what I'm looking for? Static in its development, because look, it is the still photography is a static form, and it has been awfully successful since its introduction back in the mid-1990s. But video metadata, as you all learned in the in yesterday's session, is in full development. Meaning the metadata standard is in full development right now with IPTC, and there's already in real time right now rollout among what I call early adopters. One of which is Storyblocks, the content licensing platform out of Washington, D.C., a DMLA member, as well as a number of other platforms who have said, yes, that they will begin to adopt some of the standards. Capture, the DAM vendor, has already, I think, toggled on 112 out of the 114 fields. That's an amazing effort, which means now anybody who creates video and wants to ensure that it is universally discoverable, can ensure that by placing it into Capture, applying the metadata that from all the fields that Capture makes available to its users, and once distributed to end users and or licensing platforms like Storyblocks, that metadata will then travel and continue to remain with that asset throughout its lifespan, which means that important information like shot type, copyright information, camera angle, additional rights information will forever be with that asset.
That's a good point. And also, Matt is very correct in pointing out that my earlier example of how publishers can help spread the word about your content, that only works if you as a content provider are utilizing the IPTC embedding method for triggering the badge. Obviously, if
Yes.
you're just relying on schema markup of the source page on your back on your site, when the image comes off your site and on someone else's, that data doesn't go, and therefore the badge doesn't trigger. But that does bring up a good point that is sometimes lost in the conversation, is that we're all talking about embedding the badge on the preview that you throw up on your website, but when you do the final high resolution fulfillment to the client, you also have to remember to put the badge in that file, because that's what the publisher is going to be using to generate their derivatives to put on their websites and other places. So if it's not already part of your workflow to put the badge in the high res, consider doing that, because it's only going to assist you down the road. Matt.
And, Doug, I'm sorry, I have just a follow on to that. Robert, is it also true that the SmartFrame technology keeps the IPTC metadata? So if someone is using SmartFrame, that will still translate through to Google image search if that happens to be there for the contributor data?
That'd be correct, yes. So obviously part of the SmartFrame is you have a caption box, and it gives that persistent attribution, and any metadata is always carried forward within the caption box of the SmartFrame, wherever it's shared online. But of course, because that's a sealed file unit, whatever's then released from that unit will always have the metadata inside the thumbnail that we then release to the wider world, as it were.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, the flexibility of SmartFrame, and again, this sounds like a commercial, but I've been working with them for over a year now, and I'm just constantly amazed at just the options I have. And I was talking earlier about the preview size being one of the factors in SEO ranking. In SmartFrame, you basically can click a button, decide what size thumbnail are you going to generate and present to the crawler, without having to worry about pre-rendering or changing your own code. It's just like, I want the big thumbnail, or I want the small thumbnail. And from that point going forward, that's what SmartFrame supplies to the crawler. So there are a lot of flexible benefits of using these dynamic streaming technologies, and that's just another one of them. I cannot believe we don't have any questions, guys. I mean, there is so much tech that we've been talking about for the last week. I mean, ask us anything about any subject, because there is a lot of technical people on this panel that are probably qualified to answer your questions. Otherwise, we're just going to keep riffing on what we talked about on Monday. A quick note on the universal RF license. Already, the committee who's formed to analyze, to look into it, has come back with a recommendation, and I totally support it. But they said, you know what, rather than call it universal, because it sort of has a geographic implication, the name will likely get changed to Uniform RF License Initiative. And that way, they were thinking that in addition to coming up with an URF license definition, they'd also come up with a dictionary or some sort of reference document of uniform license terms, because oftentimes in a legal document, they'll say something and then there'll be an appendix that says, the definition of that term is X. And the lawyers are saying it would be helpful if you standardize the definitions of the terms that are used inside the license. So it's all coming together in that way. So don't be surprised in the future. I refer to it as a uniform RF license. It's the same thing as we're talking about here today. All right, so let's talk about.
Actually, Doug, we have a question in there.
Oh, you? Quick, run. Who is it?
Thomas Smith.
There we go.
All right, Tom. Thank you.
Tom, you want to say it, or you want us to talk about it?
You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you want.
Yeah, I'm happy to ask it directly.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm wondering, if you have a situation where you have the same asset on multiple marketplaces, which happens very often in editorial, probably less often in creative where there's more exclusivity. Say both marketplaces are providing, standards compliant badges. How does Google decide whose they're going to display? So if I have an asset on Getty and Alame, both of whom I think implement the badge, and somebody searches for that asset, Google's not going to display both Alame and Getty's copy. How are they going to choose whose copy to put on there?
That's a great question.
I think the answer is that they do display it. I would imagine that as is, for example, whenever you search for a subject, on Google, you might come up with a search result that actually shows a similar image on multiple platforms. Images, of course, don't just reside on, unless of course they're exclusive on one single platform, they reside multiple places. And any one of those platforms who have instituted the badges, requirements, it'll be visible in the search result.
Yeah. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, in my experience, I know that by reading some materials back in time from Google, they don't penalize for duplicate images. So if you are using stock imagery or imagery that's been used elsewhere, at least your website is not penalized, your content and material and article is not penalized for reuse of an image. But for that image showing up, that same image showing up in Google search results, it will probably be your most common SEO ranking factor things we always point back to. What is the implied non-Google number? Domain authority. What is the value of that domain? How long has it been up and running? How many links does that domain or that page have or that image have? I've certainly seen where images that are on articles show up really well if somebody's linking to an image, like if it's an infographic or something, but that may not apply for what you're talking about here. But also contextual relevance cues. In that article, how much content is there? How long is that article? Is it relevant to what's in that image? Is it relevant to what you searched for? I think where you'll probably find that the content is maybe discounted and not as important as if you do like a reverse image lookup within Google image search. At that point, you're probably looking at page authority, domain authority, maybe the quality or the size of the image. But if you're looking for the context around that image and someone's using the same image multiple times, it's probably all those things plus the actual article and the material around it and how someone has optimized that page properly for search results.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because what I'm seeing is not that it's being duplicated. And in fact, it looks like Google's choosing one or the other. And it seems kind of arbitrary, you know, for assets we might have in multiple marketplaces. And what's interesting too is that the one that it's choosing between different similar domains from the same marketplace seems arbitrary too. So like when I search one of our images by its metadata that's on Getty, I might get a getty.co.uk. I might get a getty.com. I might get a Getty, Getty of some random place where you've localized the content. So it looks like, and then there's some where Alame, for whatever reason, if we have a duplicated asset there, is the kind of the winner. And I'm not seeing, even if metadata of an image I know is also in Getty, I'm not seeing the Getty results. So it looks to me like it's not duplicating the image, it's making a choice. And maybe it's what you're saying, Matt, that it's the SEO context overall, but that's interesting because it feels like it sets up the different agencies to kind of, at least for non-exclusive assets, to be in a little bit of a fight with each other in terms of who has the best SEO. Right?
Well, who has the best SEO is going to become the new T-shirt, for everyone in the future. Because in general, our market has been pretty lax about pushing to get imagery into the index for the reasons that were stated earlier, and now it's the one of the hottest topics in town. But yeah, to the spoils, to the victor go the spoils when it comes to getting your SEO game together. And Getty is on top for a reason. They were very good at what they do. They've been doing it a long time. They have a lot of published material out there. In fact, one of the first questions I asked for Francois at Google when I saw the feature go live, and there was a whole bunch of Getty content out there that had what looked like partial implementation of the badge, where you would see the badge, but then there would be no link to go get the image. And it was like really confusing. And upon analyzing the content, I realized that Getty had been for a long time embedding content into that IPTC field before the badge even existed. And so by happenstance, they picked a IPTC field to support the badge, and Getty had, by coincidence, been putting data into that field for a long time. And so instantly they got the badge. Not that they're not going to go back and put in the right data into that field so that people can click through to buy the image. It would obviously make sense if they did that. But that's just an example of how being first and, aware is working to their advantage. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I just think that over time, as more and more agencies get their act together and get the badge out there and publishers buy the content, it's going to, start to even out a bit. But Tom, that was the first thing I asked Victor, Francois, when I saw him was, how are you going to dedupe? What's going to be the logic behind deduping these exact same images in all these different places? And he just, and not that he was trying to avoid the question, he just said, we don't right now see a need for it. It sort of happens naturally based on the SEO ranking that we have in place. So they're not under any obligation to make it a democratic process. It's who's best at SEO is who's going to be on top. And that's basically the end of the game.
It's important to remember that the licensable badge pickup of the IPTC metadata or the schema markup data, which was the first question of all SEOs, is this a ranking factor? And the answer was no. It is not a ranking factor, but if you don't have it and a user filters to the commercial license filter in Google Images, of course, your image isn't going to show up there. Or if you do have it, it is going to show up there. So that's something very important to remember, is that you got to be in the game to win it. And having that badging and that metadata follow through is very important.
Leslie's asking, is there any differences between, SEO as it relates to images or SEO as it relates to video? And I'm going to leave Matt maybe to talk about that, because I can't think of any.
Yeah, the Google team yesterday got into this a little bit, but there was not a large amount of embellishment upon it. I think it's because they were talking primarily about the badge and the metadata. Video and imagery is something hard for Google to pick out every so often. There are certainly different ways to treat each one of these media types. The still is something that Google was talking about yesterday, in making sure to optimize the still image that represents the video in the same ways you would do image SEO. I think where image SEO, video SEO comes into play is you're competing against YouTube at that point a lot of times. And you have to be able to do and be as valuable as a YouTube page on your own website, if that's what you're doing, if you're embedding video onto your own site. I'm not recommending that stock photography or stock video and footage websites go out to YouTube and put all their videos there. I think that would be a difficult task to achieve, and I don't know what the result of that would be for a user experience. But there's certainly an argument that when someone types in the word video or footage, YouTube is on page one. YouTube takes up that large chunk, that large block above the page fold. It's certainly difficult to get past at times. But I would say making sure that if there is any audio that goes along with it, contextual relevance of that video, having descriptions, and the things that are said, the transcript of what's in that video present on the page will be the differentiating factor.
One of the things that I'm encouraging the audience to do, not necessarily at this moment, but DMLA and other trade organizations are working with Google on this, and it's a brave new frontier, and they're still very receptive for feedback about these features. So if there's something that you would like to see different about either the badge or Google Images in general, like for example, I was noticing the other day that it seems like such a common sense thing, but if you do a Google search, one of the things you always are used to seeing is a count at the top. You found 17,000 pages or whatever. But the moment you click over to the images interface, the count goes away. It's like, we're not going to tell you how many images you found in the Google index, or that's going to be, you're on your own to figure that out. And I'm like, well, why the difference, guys? Why would you be upfront with the data in the general search, but then the data not be visible in the image search? So that would be helpful, especially from a developer's perspective. Another one that's relatively, again, this is sort of a Nitnoy UI thing, but one of the things I love about Google Images is their related images feature. When you click on a thumbnail and you get that big preview, below it, you'll see an array of thumbs that they consider to be related, like thumbs up for doing that, except that the related images are ignoring the filter. So if I said I want to see commercially available licenses, it shows me an array of licenses, and then I go click on the related images, suddenly that filter gets stripped, and now I'm looking at a bunch of non-licensable related content. And of course, if I'm an image researcher, it's like, thanks but no thanks. I kind of need you to show me related images that are licensable. Otherwise, that feature doesn't have much benefit to me. So if you think of things like that, feel free to send your ideas to me or anyone at DMLA, and we'll compile them and put them into a wish list to Google and see what comes out of it. Any other questions?
No question for Matt there, I believe.
Go ahead and say it out, Rob, because I don't see it.
From Thomas Smith there.
There you go, yeah.
Tom, let's see if we can get you back to, can you unmute yourself at this point? No, probably not. All right, you're back.
There we go. Yes, another question, kind of sort of a follow-up. If we're selling through channels, if we're providing assets and doing our own annotation and metadata and keywording, but we're handing them off to a Getty or whoever, what are some best practices that we can do as agencies to make sure that the data we're providing to you is SEO friendly? what should we take into account there?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely continue to provide the most amount of metadata that you can when the systems come through. I will be the first one to tell you I work more on the front end rather than the ingestion end. So it's certainly valuable to me that I'm trying to work with our contributors, whether they be individual contributors or the contributors that we get in mass, on making sure that the data that comes into the systems that we have are ready to be presentable out the front end. So the most amount of metadata that you would normally like to have in there that the Getty system is asking for through either our API ingestions or other ways that we take in our material, definitely continue to follow those guidelines. Ask your individual representative that you have that is with the Getty team, what are the standards? What is it that I can do to provide you the most amount of information? Because that certainly makes an easier time for us as a marketplace, whether it be Getty or iStock or any other marketplace. It makes it a lot easier for us to be able to ingest it, categorize it, and make it visible to the people that come to our websites and search. So work with the person that is your representative when you speak to them. That's the best advice I can give to you.
With regard to the attaching of metadata, if you're a photographer and you're submitting your content to a stock agency, you have to allow for the fact that since they're marketing the content on your behalf, you should expect them to strip out your badge data and replace it with theirs, because again, that's the relationship that you have with your person. And of course, if you're a content producer or content distributor, you need to start checking for the existence of a badge and the stuff you're ingesting. Otherwise, it's going to flow through to your website. And again, this is all a policy issue and what sort of agreement you have with your providers, but it's another thing to add to your workflow as a double check of the metadata that's being embedded in some of the content.
I can tell you that will never, ever, ever happen, period.
Which one?
All of the entire scenario that you just laid out, that you will never, ever, ever have a single contributor ever take time to really give serious thought to the metadata. It's such a rarity that you could count it. It's like finding a diamond on a basketball court. The second thing that's never going to happen is that you will never have a stock media platform invest a single bit of effort into improving the metadata that comes in from any of their contributors. Getty and iStock in the very beginning of their lives spent inordinate amounts of money and time and effort and human resource to maintain what was seen at the time as being the most perfectly conceived metadata schema and homogeneous metadata environment. And then only to see that go to the wind when Shutterstock ascended in the stock market, in the licensed stock media market, and give competition to the likes of Getty. And because Shutterstock allowed their content contributors to put whatever they wanted to put there. There were really, they gave them a couple of parameters of, well, you have to fill in this field, you have to fill in that field. You should have no more than X number of keywords. But in terms of what is actually placed there, that's up to the content contributor. And even in the review process, what I call the first sets of eyes and brain cells on the content, as it arrives on those platforms, only a few of the stock media licensing platforms allow for the reviewers, the editors, the first sets, the filters, to actually amend, modify, and or fresh keyword on behalf of the content contributor. It's just because the volumes we're speaking about are just so dramatic. And I'm not going to give you the name of any content. I'm not going to give you the name of a platform, but I can tell you that on any given day, any one of the larger platforms are probably taking in north of 50,000 pieces of still content per day. And it could be north of 10 to 15,000 pieces of motion content any given day. Now you understand the almost Herculean effort that has to be put into place to filter that content for a variety of criteria, whether it's aesthetic, compositional, commercial value, much less metadata, which has been given short shrift. Again, once the experiment with Getty was died, very rarely have I ever seen in the last 20 years since 2010, so 10 years. 10 years, any agency give any sort of effort to improving the metadata on any of their content.
That's I'm sure Mike may have something to say about that. My personal experience has been a little different, but again, maybe it had to do with the kind of agencies that I deal with. But I was shocked at the number of agencies who said, I don't want the photographer giving metadata. It's just so unstructured. If they just give me a clean caption, that's enough for me to do what I have to do. And then they run it through, of course, their internal processes, whether it's human or, you know, again, my age tells me. I remember the day when I would go to India and I would walk into this room of 100 people on their computers reading the captions, and then they would type in the caption into Google, or I'm sorry, let me be more specific. They would type it into the Corbis website, bring up an image that looks similar to the one that they were trying to keyword, copy all the keywords from the Corbis image, drop it into their spreadsheet, literally an Excel spreadsheet. And then that gets all pushed into another team who then consolidates and puts in the image. And that was the sophisticated keywording system that was in place at the time. Now we've got AI, to assist us. And I'm hoping that, that makes a big difference in both the quality and the cost, or reducing the cost of
Absolutely not. I beg to differ that AI's intrusion into the metadata application process for stock imagery has not improved things. In fact, it's made things much worse. There's actually a greater effort now spent on cleaning up AI generated metadata than there is on application, because AI can tell you that that's a dog barely. It can tell you that that's a glass, but it doesn't know that it's water or vodka that's in it. It certainly cannot tell you what any person in a image is thinking, what kind of conceptual, in other words, it cannot generate conceptual information. It doesn't know that that smile in Southeast Asia might indicate apprehension. It doesn't know what the Mona Lisa is thinking, much less anybody who's ever looked at the Mona Lisa. Most people probably could not discern what she's trying to think. And if you can imagine that AI, I always sort of tell anybody who asks me that AI at this very moment is the equivalent of allowing a 6-year-old child into your office and then telling him or her to go start to do something on any computer or any object in the office. You absolutely, as an adult, want to be there to make sure that that child does not do something wrong. AI's ability to apply basic sets of metadata, and I mean extremely basic sets of metadata to still imagery, is there. It's something. AI's ability to apply metadata to video is a long way off, and I mean a long way off.
I agree. It's a moving target, and it's evolving. And I'm gonna keep being the optimist and say that it will get to the point where it'll be highly accurate. But in my experience, what usually works the best is to let the machine do what the machine does best, and let the human do what the human does best, which is a hybrid where the initial basic keywording might be done in a systematic way by an AI agent, and then it's put up for review by humans. And maybe only under the circumstances where the AI says, you know what, it's a coin toss. I don't know if it's vodka or water, so I'm going to mark that for review by a human, and then they come in and do what they do best and say, oh yeah, that's obviously water because of X.
So that works really, really well at boutique agencies where the content volume, the inbound content volume is very, very small. And that might work very, very well, let's say, for a marketing department of a mid-sized company, or even a large corporation, international corporation, where the numbers that we're talking about are literally tens of thousands over a period of maybe in a month. But when you're talking about tens of thousands of images per day, 7 days a week, literally 1 million images a month, or 1 million assets, and I should not confuse images with video and or graphics. 1 million assets in a month, which is a typical inbound content number for the likes of Getty, Shutterstock, maybe not so much for Alamy, but Pond 5, other companies. Wow, you have to have a lot of eyes on, and the cost attached to all that is dramatic, and very few people are willing to make that investment.
The application for image recognition AI goes way beyond just initial keywording. And I'm not sure if anyone, and maybe Matt can share this or not, but what I've always dreamt of was a system that would look at a submission by a photographer and say, hey, well, first of all, that's an image you gave us last month that we rejected, and you're doing it again. That's kind of low-hanging, slow-pitch kind of image recognition application. But the one I always wanted to see put in place was you get a submission, and then automatically the system says, I'm going to look at all these images, I'm going to compare them visually with the images that are already in our collection, And then I'm going to look at the sales history and popularity of the images that are in the system. So right away, as soon as I see submission, I'm going to highlight the ones that are visually similar to our best performers, so that when the human is looking at the creating the collection, he's given kind of a cheat sheet and saying, well, that to me as a person may not look like a really compelling image, but I've got a whole lot of analytical information that's telling me that that picture that I think is crap is actually worth a lot of money because its sisters are doing and have done extremely well in our market over time. And so that kind of assisted curating agent, based on an AI engine, I think would be an interesting application. Leslie's asking about the content authenticity initiative, which I wasn't able to watch that session. And I was just wondering if the other panelists had a chance to see that and had any comment about its adoption or what you thought about it in general. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'll jump in that I've spoken with them about joining up on the content on the CAI, because I think it's a really, really important initiative to be part of. And I think that they are, as they said, in the information collection phase right now, where they're really just trying to get a lot of inputs from as many people as possible. They're identifying partners to work with. They're a very skeletal crew at this very, very moment, although of course the skeletal crew is made up of the heavyweights of the industry, and certainly it pertains a very, very positive outcome. It will definitely be the kind of a badge that any agency platform will want to have on its homepage. No different, let's say, than the Good Housekeeping seal of approval, something from consumer affairs. In other words, some sort of a green badge, a thumbs up, a green frog that says that you have reached a certain level of best practices when it comes to ensuring that the content that you are showing, or that we are showing, is authentic. It has been vetted, and it is not coming from a nefarious source.
On a sort of tangentially related topic, there was a session on building a secure ecosystem for publishing content. Rob was on that panel, and one of the things I don't know, again, I didn't get a chance to see the whole thing, but one of the takeaways that I've always encouraged people to consider when they're thinking about integrating all these different solutions, whether it's a streaming still technology like SmartFrame, or a invisible watermark embedding system like what Imatag would do, or again, all these different disparate systems. The goal, one of the key takeaways is to understand that it's the DAM who is the hub of that tech. And if you can get the DAM to recognize the value of playing the role of integrator and taking the burden off of the consumer, meaning the stock agency in most cases, that's going to really make a big difference in the adoption of these technologies. And so I always encourage the tech providers, you may have your own solution, but be thinking more holistically about how can you make it easier for your clients to take you on as a provider. And it turns out that in most cases, at least in my experience, by working with the DAM and getting them to say, okay, we'll make sure that, again, I keep harking back to panoramic images, their production staff have no idea that all this stuff is happening on the back end. They literally are doing what they've always done, which is they curate an image, put it into their DAM, and that's the end of it, because automatically it's being sent over to SmartFrame to generate what they need to do. Automatically it's being Digimarked by, it's being invisibly watermarked by Digimark. Automatically it's being uploaded to their content tracking system. This is all happening at no extra overhead cost to the customer. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because integration costs can be significant, and it's a deterrent for people taking on new tech. Also, the burden of adding to the labor, like for example, if you're using a copyright tracking system partner and they're asking you, upload your images every month to us, that's an extra amount of overhead that should be avoided, because you're already uploading your images anyway to your own DAM. And if you can tap into that and not have to do it twice, obviously there's a big competitive advantage by offering that kind of convenience. I'm going to throw out to the panelists, and is there anything that you want to say or comment on or follow up or expand on that you had talked about earlier?
Yeah, sure. So I can touch on maybe the content authenticity initiative, and obviously some of the metadata and all the things we've been talking about today. From our point of view, I guess, all the time we're still releasing a JPEG file format, with all the metadata in the world and all the licensable badge button and SEO rank, and at the end of the day, the images can still be stolen unless we find a way of securely distributing those images with the metadata and the licensable badge and all the credit attribution authenticity data. Then I think we're kind of seriously overlooking the problem, because we're chipping it away, putting all this stuff in place, but in reality then people just go into the internet and right clicking, drag and drop, stealing the image, distributing it across the internet, and then we're doing ambulance chasing using infringement services trying to track those infringements down. And I think we're also fighting over trying to get best SEO ranking. Matt does a great job there. But we're all pushing ourselves there to get into the licensable badge. I'm not sure who we're kidding, really. Is this growing the market? Is this making more opportunities for commercial licensing sales? The real mass proliferation and use of photography on the internet have no intention of licensing images, whether they find a licensable badge button or not. And I think this industry is, we're so focused on winning the smaller prize, the smaller piece of business. Less than 5% of web traffic results in a licensing sale. Less than 5% of all infringements found on the internet are commercially pursuable. There's this huge marketplace of people sharing and consuming imagery that we're not looking up to. And that's where the real commercial opportunity is for this industry. And I think that's really what we should be addressing, and where some interesting conversations start taking place. And that's kind of, I guess I'm looking up rather than looking down, and how can we address that mass consumer market of imagery? They have no intention to license. I think we can take a lot of learning from YouTube. Look at how many YouTube videos, there's some really interesting stats. If you go to Internet Live Stats, how many YouTube videos are being watched and shared every day? The counter is just going through the roof. And trust me, JPEG images are going through the roof and being shared in just a prolific way. But no one's licensing them. They're just looking at them and sharing them, and they have no intention of licensing them. So why don't we come up with a commercial model that can address that mass market? And
isn't that already being sort of addressed by the business of free? I mean, you have Pexels, you have Unsplash.
But the business of free doesn't drive much commercial value to the image owner.
That is possibly so. Although if you had said it, I'm sure you did listen to the business of free, the free content panel the other day. According to the principals who spoke, they think that there is value added via sort of bringing people in, giving them free images, and then enticing them somehow through means into actually purchasing their making a purchase up from the free model.
Sure.
It's
a marketing technique, basically, to try and get more licensing.
They think it's going to work.
So to sell one, they've got to give away 10.
Yes, it's interesting. So I don't know if that's a business either. I mean, I'm not.
So then, if you take the value that you get from one sale and distribute it across 11, it's another race to the bottom. Let's just keep dropping our pants and dropping our pricing. Is that really the solution?
I don't think so at this moment. Although some people would differ with us, I'm sure. But I have to agree with you. I don't think it is a business, because I think if you give anything away for free, it brings its value down to zero. Exactly. That's zero is not a value.
I guess obviously being very biased, but from our point of view, it's going back to the music industries, the film industries, early days of the internet, both had huge piracy problems, huge value leakage, find it very difficult to survive, and they adopted streaming technology. And it was through that they regained rights control. They allowed propaganda of their content all over the internet, but in a controlled way. And they drove value from either subscription to access that content on demand, or gave it away for free, but interrupted by ads and generating ad revenue every time that content was viewed. And just imagine if we could get paid every time our images were viewed online for free, not the 5% of the market that are traditionally licensing for commercial use, the billions of images that are being stolen and used with no licensing and have no intention to license, but allow them to share it in a controlled way, just like they share and enjoy YouTube videos, enjoy your interactive imagery, but with pre-roll ads, and get paid every time your images are viewed. They get to use the content for free with great functionality, and we get paid every time images are viewed. And I think, for me, that's a much more interesting conversation to be looking at.
There is without a doubt, there is tons of advantages to streaming file format. I mean, the dream of being able to expire an image that's legally licensed, that's been on the front of people's minds for 20 years, and streaming does that. The ability to adapt the ad to the circumstances that it's being viewed under, another great benefit. And the list goes on and on and on. But, Intel, I'm not saying Intel, I'm saying, one thing that would help popularize the format is if you took a picture of the camera and it spat out the file format that they need to put on their website for it to be streamed. Right now, that's not possible. They have to go through an extra step to turn it into something that can be streamed. So there are definitely some hurdles in the way, but you're doing exactly the right thing, which is going out there and preaching the benefits, because I've been watching you do this now for years, and you are getting really good at it. I mean, you are really making a compelling argument. And so it really, to me, is like, now it's an implementation issue. The argument of why it should work or how it should work is over. It's like, how can I get this implemented in a very cost-effective way and, see how it works? And I know you guys are working hard to do that. I'm going to just not cut you off.
And some of those hurdles, like camera manufacturers, are ones that we are currently addressing. To the point from I think the lens go down, it appears as a smartphone onto the internet in the future. So
yeah, well, you know how I feel about it and what I called it when you first showed it to me. I think my quote was, it was the turning point, and how images were going to get published on the web for commercial use. Anyway,
I
Tom,
think it's just more about, definitely we should continue pursuing the traditional licensing, obviously all the SEO best practices, but we're fighting over a very small piece of pie. There's a much bigger piece of cake available to us that we're not addressing, and I just think we should take time to try and address that market as well.
All right, so Tom, you had another question. Let's hear what we have.
I was just going to jump in. No one ever shut my video off, so I figure I'll keep asking, have a lot more questions. With Matt, I think addressed the downstream side. Once the content is in a marketplace, how is that being provided, and how's the SEO being optimized? Mark, you're more on the ingest side, as I understand it. If I'm an agency and I have $1 to spend or X amount to spend per image, what are the fields? What are the kinds of metadata, whether it's with an outside provider or my own staff? Where should I be using that dollar or those dollars to maximize the SEO? Is it keywords? Is it descriptions? Is it identifying people, locations? How does it differ between editorial and creative?
Right. So when we talk about creative imagery, we're speaking about, in order to give what I call the asset the greatest degree of visibility, I would say that I would tell you that some agencies split their search reference from between the description, the caption, and the single silo of keywords that accompany that asset. Some exclusively go or draw their search results from the description or the caption. Some, vice versa, go exclusively from the keywording, and some force the keywords to be in a certain order. The most important keywords to be put up front at the very beginning, the 10 most important keywords, and then in a descending order, and that has to be decided by you. If it's just, let's say, the average agency, I might tell you that the more descriptive, the better. Meaning that it's not the volume of terminology or the volume of keywords, because the volume of keywords really should be no more than, let's say, 25 words for a still asset, between 5 and 12 words for a caption, and maybe a maximum of 25 words for the asset keywords. Depending if it's a creative image, you certainly want to describe the clothing. You certainly want to describe the people that might be in the image, the location. Be as descriptive, as colorful in your language as possible. When it comes to video, that is a completely different ballgame. Video metadata, modern commercial video metadata has come down to what I call a present state of the art, where the caption might include, let's say, between 5 and 12 words, but a maximum of maybe 15 keywords, with very, very little emphasis on what the people in the video are wearing, very, very little emphasis on their emotions, much more emphasis on the shot type, the camera angle, as being very, very important, because the majority of end users, the majority of licensors of motion content are going to be people who are actively involved in the editing process, rather than at the very beginning stages, rather than the person who's doing what I call the creative side. So, but I'm happy to also sit down with you at any other time to talk in much greater detail with much greater specificity. I know we're running out of time here.
All right. Well, we're at time. Thank you, Mark. That was great, as always. And I just want to say thank you again to the panelists for coming back and joining us for this follow-up. I hope you've learned a lot. I know I have, and we will see you at the next session. Thanks.